everyone, and welcome to the first edition of In Conversation, where I sit down with thought leaders and explore issues that are important for educational leadership and well-being. So I'm delighted today to be joined by Jennifer Abrams, who I first came across a couple of years ago, actually, at an EARCOT's leadership conference in Thailand. Um, and I just found her perspectives on communication and leadership really insightful, and they had a real impact on how I kind of then went forward, particularly with regard to difficult but necessary conversations. So in today's episode, we are going to explore the link between those kind of challenging conversations and well-being, looking at why they're important in the first place, how leaders can manage their own well-being around them, and how we can also consider the well-being of the other person in the process. But before we jump in, Jennifer, I'm going to throw it over to you so that you can introduce yourself to anybody who might not be familiar with you.
Thank you. And thank you for having me. Jennifer Abrams. I'm based in the US, in California. I'm a communications consultant, former teacher, former new teacher coach, facilitated professional learning for leaders and new teachers, and all educators K-12 within a school system here, and then became a consultant. I've written 5 books, and one of those books was Having Hard Conversations. And so glad to talk about it today.
Awesome. So let's dive in then. So challenging conversations, I guess they are an inevitable part of any leadership journey, but it's the kind of thing that leaders dread. I know personally, I hated them. I would delay them for as long as I possibly could. Quite often I would invest a lot of energy finding ways to work around the issue rather than having the conversation, but it kind of always landed back at the same place, having to have that conversation in the first place. So how do you think these kind of challenging conversations can feed into individual and organizational well-being, and can they actually be a tool for well-being?
I actually think that organizationally, they can be a tool. I've been thinking about it since you posed those questions to me. And this idea of the organization having a sense of being a healthy adult learning culture, and the expectations of people developing themselves to be in conversations like this is something that will ultimately, although challenging, short term, will ultimately increase organizational well-being, because there's going to be a public agreement around expectations. And so we do speak up around what matters. We do create opportunities for psychological safety, and everybody speaks to each other in humane and growth producing ways. And so if a hard conversation is not really how we're looking at it, we're looking at, we speak up around what matters. We've had public agreements around that. There's a sense of integrity. There's a safety. There's a transparency. There's just, in my opinion, sort of less stress around certain things, because we know clearly why the organization is doing this and how we expect to be. Individually, the idea of having a hard conversation, of course, makes me worry, but I also know that if I don't have the hard conversation, I have insomnia, I have stomach upset, I'm not living my values, and the body keeps score. You will physically, it will show up if you do not speak to something that you're feeling aligned with, ethically, and then also just committed to your job, and feeling responsible to that. It will diminish your ability to feel like you can do it as a person, but it'll also just like physiologically just hurt you if you do not speak up. And so I think well-being, and I know it seems strange, well-being and having a hard conversation, how do they align? I think we could speak to it, and I could write an entire book about it. I think it's very aligned.
Yeah, I love what you say there about that kind of notion of integrity and psychological safety. It feels almost like by speaking up, you're signaling to that person that you value them enough to be honest as well. And kind of it's with that growth perspective that that's going to be really beneficial.
Absolutely.
Well, you alluded to kind of my experience there as well, the sleepless nights and the days playing it out beforehand, and the kind of like I had a lot of conversations of this nature in my time as a leader, but many different kind of topics, many different themes, but they all had in common that kind of intense stress that preceded them, kind of, and not just half an hour before the meeting starts, right? It's the days that you're playing them over in your head and the restless nights, like you say. So, what strategies could leaders use to approach these conversations in a way that actually protects their well-being?
Yeah. So I think that if you are coming from a space where this isn't a surprise, so I call this clarity before accountability. If you know in your sort of professional space that you and the organization have been clear about the expectations, then you are asking people to live up to them. In a sense, you're not coming at somebody, you're not doing it to have a power play. You're doing it because in your role, you need to get into what a gentleman who lived in the States passed away. He was a congressman here, John Lewis. He would say necessary trouble. We have to speak up. Will it be challenging? Of course, but will it be necessary for students that we do that? And so I think for in how to protect your well-being, this is not a shock. This is an expectation. Somebody hasn't met it. You feel on solid ground. Another thing that would protect your well-being is to know that in your space, if you see something that is educationally unsound or professionally unsound or physically unsafe or emotionally damaging, that you have the tools and you have the capacity and the permission and the expectation to speak up, so that you're not in alignment with what you ethically think is right, but also what the organizational requirements expect of you. um, I just think between those two, your well-being is somewhat more protected than you just being asked to come in. You don't, where did this come from? And you're doing it as a power play. I also think that it will protect your well-being if you have prepared and are doing it from a humane and growth producing way. You're showing empathy, you're showing vulnerability, you're not coming at it to hurt somebody. Will also will let you go to sleep at night knowing that you got into necessary trouble, but you did it the right way and you did it based on expectations that were already there. It's not going to be troubling, but you'll protect your well-being by actually those ideas.
Yeah. I think when there's the expectation that it's okay to do that, and when they're done well, I guess it kind of feels a little bit less like conflict and more like care, I guess. It's kind of, yes, perspective.
It's a different perspective. And so, will you protect your well-being? I think that we have to look at well-being in a very different way. Is it going to feel uncomfortable and not feel, quote, well? Probably. Well-being over time, your confidence, your capacity to sleep at night, your understanding of your integrity and supporting the school's integrity, that also promotes well-being, right? So we have to look at the term well-being and see it maybe in a different light than we have.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I love that. Um, so even if these kind of conversations are well intentioned and kind of justified and being done for all the right reasons, they can still, to a certain extent, feel quite harsh or quite jarring to the recipient. So, how can we kind of balance being direct and clear and kind of reasoned in what we're saying, whilst also kind of considering the emotional and psychological impact on the other person?
So I love David Rock's work. David Rock is a neuropsychologist, and he talks about the scarf model. And he talks about that not the scarf model is just this framework of different ways that people get triggered when a threat comes at them. And we could go into the whole thing, but it's the idea of being thoughtful around your language so that you don't add to the threat. So I encourage you to look up Dr. David Rock and the Neuro Leadership Institute. That gets us into language. And I think that really being mindful of being direct, but not triggering, not adding verbal paper cuts in terms of words. So starting with a respect for the individual and respecting their dignity, and in your role, also bringing up things that were expectations, sort of allows for you to show a sense of empathy and for them to see you're not coming at them. So, language to begin with, the language around the scarf model. I also imagine sort of your body language at certain points also sort of protects their dignity and shows a sense of understanding for them. So at different points, palms up shows a sense of approachability and a sense of care for the other person. Palms together. And when you have to say something direct, your palms are down. They're not at them. They're not pointing at them. I think that that kind of body language happens and can change and also add empathy, but also show directness. I wonder if, just one other thing, if where you have the conversation might assist the individual in feeling a little safer so you could make a decision. And I'm not saying that your office, if you're a leader, is the wrong place to do it, but if you go to them, does that show sort of a I'm meeting you halfway kind of a thing?
Yeah, like
Are you sitting? Yeah, on your neutral ground. You could sit in neutral ground. You could take a walk. You could sit versus sitting behind a desk. You could sit at a table. So I think that really your language, the nonverbals, your location can also kind of be thoughtful around what you've mentioned is the emotional and psychological impact. And notice that I say the word and not but or however, and also hold the accountability. So I'm always talking to people about they're not mutually exclusive. Care and accountability can happen in the same conversation. Just got to be
yeah,
thoughtful.
absolutely. Yeah, and that thought beforehand is so important, even in, like you say, those kind of micro movements, even kind of just taking that time to think through. And I think another thing with that that just sprang to mind is like all that planning and work and psyching yourself up for those conversations. You can fall into that trap of wanting that kind of resolution right there and then, right? And sometimes one of the best things you can do is just to let the conversation settle and give it a little bit of room to breathe, not necessarily kind of let's just get this done now because we're doing it kind of thing.
And I also think then that for your well being, you're going to have to be able to manage your ability for ambiguity and for uncertainty and for non closure. So that is a well being, a strength. Maybe meditate, maybe take walks, maybe work to increase your capacity to sit in discomfort, not just for hard conversations, but for when things come from on high, from the board. I think to be able, all of you, the people that you're having the hard conversation with and you, to be able to manage discomfort a little bit more will increase your well-being tremendously. Not easy, not simple, but really, really important for well-being.
Brilliant. Jennifer, thank you so much for those insights. Thank you for being our very first guest. It's been awesome.
Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome.